veterans from the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. And Millet Day, who's here, is our president. He's going to be working with veterans from World War I and World War II. So I'm going to get the ball rolling tonight with John Burbank. And you do research on the early start of Coxall, which became Lyman. A lot was written about, and you know John Burbank was there. And you know it was about John Burbank. And they never really filled in the blanks for us as to who he was or what happened. So we've done a little digging, and we've made a display board for you to keep. And I'm going to read it to you, the story of John Burbank. And he is already on our webpage as our veteran for the month of November. So John Burbank was born in Arundel, Kennebunk in 1752. And he enlisted in Noah Littlefield's company and was stationed in Wells in the defense of York County, and later was in Portsmouth. Now we'll get to the good part. In 1776, he signed on to the crew of the Dalton, which set sail from Portsmouth on November 26, 1776. On Christmas Eve, of all days, the Dalton was captured by the HMS Reasonable, and the crew of the Dalton was charged with high treason, and he was held prisoner in the Old Mill Prison in Plymouth, England. It was notorious as being one of the worst prisons in England to be in. American prisoners dug tunnels to try to escape from there in July of 1777 and January of 1778. However, John Burbank remained there throughout the time. He was in the prison for 2 years, and at the end of 1778, he came home as part of a prisoner exchange which was arranged by Benjamin Franklin. In 1779, he turns around only a few months later, and he signs on as the Master Sergeant of Arms of the Bonhomme Richard under the command of Captain John Paul Jones. The ship was a refitted cargo ship named for Benjamin Franklin, and his pen name was Poor Richard. And the Bonhomme Richard set sail on its first mission in June of 1779, and they captured 16 British merchant ships. So they go out again in August of 1779. On September 23rd, they encountered the HMS Serapis, a British man of war, fitted with 64 cannons. This was off Flamborough Head on the east coast of England. Immediately, the Serapis shot the mast off the American ship. John Paul Jones was asked to surrender by the British captain, but when the ship passed close, he said, "Sir, I have just begun to fight." When the British ship passed close by, Jones had his crew lash the two ships together. Now the British cannons were useless. There was a fight that went on into the night, and Jones had the advantage because his crew was twice as big as the crew of the British ship. He sent soldiers, one of them being John Burbank, into the rigging, and they were firing muskets into the ship. By 10:30 that night, the British ship had surrendered. And here's a quote from John Paul Jones' biography. Jones was beset on all sides. The Master of Arms, John Burbank, took pity on the crying prisoners trapped in the hold while the water rose around them. He set them free, and 100 Englishmen clambered onto the deck. Jones was suddenly faced with a potential prisoner revolt. That many men might have overwhelmed his crew. Fortunately for Jones, the prisoners were terrified and grateful for fresh air, and they were docile. Jones and Dale were able, with a wave of their pistols, to convince the Englishmen to man the pumps, lest they all drown together. Unfortunately, the Bonhomme Richard had so much damage to it that 36 hours later it sank. However, the Serapis was still able to be sailed. John Paul Jones loaded all the British and his crew onto the Serapis, and he sailed it into Holland. It was the first naval victory of the United States Navy, and it earned John Paul Jones the title of the Father of the United States Navy. There have been many unsuccessful attempts to recover the wreckage of the Von Allen Richard. So what does John Burbank do after this? He moves to Lyman. And he's listed in the 1790 census. He married Anna Whitten of Arundel, and the couple had a daughter, Sally, who was born in 1782, who married Joseph Taylor of Lyman. John Burbank lived to be over 90 years old, died in 1843, and he's buried on the south side of Alfred Road on the Arundel line, right across from where Ashley's Restaurant used to be. And the inscription on his gravestone reads, "A revolutionary soldier in the naval engagement under Captain Paul Jones." And so I have some pictures here that I'll show you, and I'll pass this around and you can look at it. Here's a painting of the battle with the Serapis, which was done by Paul Walsh of Newington, Connecticut. This painting is displayed in the United States Naval Museum in Washington, D.C. John Paul Jones died in France, and his body wasn't recovered until 1905. He died in 1794. And Teddy Roosevelt sent a destroyer to France to pick up his body, and it was brought to Annapolis, and he is interred in the crypt underneath the chapel at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. And here is his coffin. And here's a bust of him, and also in the room is a model of his ship. And here is John Burbank's grave, which is flat in the cemetery, but not for long, because the cemetery committee has arranged with the Veterans Administration to have a new gravestone put in for John Burbank. And there's been some damage to the cemetery recently, and I'm going to have Millet come up and talk a little bit about that. But this is yours to keep and put wherever you'd like.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. Yeah. It's the first time I've been.
I feel like I didn't want to watch it. It's like, why is she smiling? I don't think that much.
It's fabulous.
Awesome.
I'm Millet Day, president of the Lyman Historical Society. And when we first started about 5 years ago, it's kind of like, what kind of history does Lyman have? As we start digging, we find things like this that it does have a rich history. So I think a lot of people know that there was a car accident where John Burbank has now been buried, and there's a fundraiser to replace some of the stones. And so the Lyman Historical Society has made a donation on behalf of our society to the restoration of those stones that were damaged.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
For anyone who would like to donate, you can donate here at the town hall at the front desk, and they'll be happy to take your donations for you.
Do you know how long? There's no need to put an end date on that.